Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Auto-Biography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett. Chapter 7. The character of Covert did not take me long to understand, particularly as Wigglesworth volunteered a good deal of information about him, and what I could not help seeing from day to day in the office made up the rest. That he was an unprincipled man with boundless selfishness and avarice seemed sure enough, but whether he was a cunning villain or no puzzled me to tell. Covert, from what I had learned of Wigglesworth, had come reasonably by his swindling disposition. His father had given him lessons in it early, and he proved an apt scholar. One of his first tricks, when, as a young man, he entered upon the practice of the law, was as follows, the two arranging a plan to this effect. The father entered into a contract with an honest carpenter, who had got about enough ahead for him to take such a speculation, to build a house. The plan was decided on, the terms fixed, the papers drawn out, a day being mentioned in them with rigid conditions on which the house was to be completed, and the carpenter undertook his work. He had credit with the lumber, hardware, and other dealers, for he already possessed some little property of his own, and he hoped to satisfy a mortgage upon that, with the profits he should make out of Covert's job, for he did a good deal of the work himself. He had a numerous family, and he was very anxious to have for them a permanent home. Well, the job went on swimmingly, the house being enclosed and a great portion of the inside work done. But as it went on, the Coverts discovered that they wanted additional improvements made inside, various fine finishings, cornices, and etceteras, which could only be done slowly. The carpenter told the elder Covert that, in that way, the house could not be finished at the time specified. The answer was, no one else being by, not to mind, but to go on and do the work well, without troubling about the particular day it should be completed. Our carpenter was unsuspicious, and he took the matter very easily, until the arrival of the period mentioned in the contract. The next day, as he was at work in the house with his apprentices and journeymen, he was quite thunderstruck by the coming of two constables, who ordered the premises to be cleared, and then closed and nailed them up. The two scoundrels had taken their precautions and prepared their way, but too well. They had the law on their side, and the mechanic and his family were ruined. For a trumpery claim of damages was established, and not a single dollar did Covert pay for the work. The lumber and hardware merchants levied for their bills on the carpenter's own little property, all of which it took to pay them, and every dollar of his toil-earned savings was at once swept away. Such formed one of Lawyer Covert's beginnings in life, under the tutoring of his precious parent, who was withal a sanctified man, wore a white neckcloth, and wouldn't have taken the name of the Lord in vain on any account. Whether the old fellow is alive yet, I don't know, but the son is, damn him. Covert, of course I am talking of the lawyer now, had, among the forms of his selfishness, some political ambition. He had been up once already for the state legislature, but was defeated. At the present time he took some pains to get a nomination for the assembly. Our city members being then elected by general ticket, and he expected to be carried on the tide with the rest, for his party had shown a handsome working majority, as it is called, at the preceding contest. Wigglesworth could not say much about Covert's pecuniary condition. He told me that the lawyer lived in good style, however, in an uptown street, that, although occasionally pinched for money, he managed to make both ends meet, and that his business was tolerably extensive. In his treatment of me the lawyer was civil, without paying any particular attention. He evidently didn't consider me worth taking much pains about, either to gain my friendship or prevent my enmity, and doubtless troubled his mind little concerning me. It looked businesslike to have a student in the office, and I was occasionally of some assistance in copying or hunting up authorities. All this while my dislike to the profession remained the same, and the conflict was from time to time resumed in my mind whether to give it up or not. Covert himself was such an unfavorable illustration of the class that it by no means helped to reconcile me to the prospect of joining them. Inez visited our office 2 or 3 times after the adventure with Jack, and somehow we struck up quite an acquaintance together. I must confess I was a little bashful at first, but her manner was easy and sociable without being at all forward, and a young man does not long remain bashful when treated kindly by a pretty woman. One day Inez had to wait half an hour for Mr. Covert's return. Old Wigglesworth sat in his corner, deeply immersed in some specially intricate copying. Nathaniel was out in the long, wide passageway, having a romp with his dog. And as no one else seemed on hand to do the honors, I placed a chair for Inez, sat down nearby on another, and soon made quite astonishing progress for a youth who knew so little of the sex. We talked, laughed, spoke of Inez's benefit, and so forth, and had a very agreeable hour, toward the close of which the Spaniard gave me her address, and invited me to call and see her, as she was not to perform that evening. I mentioned Mr. J. Fitzmore Smith's name, and said that he spoke of her as an old acquaintance. She laughed and said, "Bring him along with you, for I don't know that I dare have you come and see me alone." Now it struck me that I had a great deal rather not have him, and I told Inez so, but she laughed more heartily than before. "I make Smith an indispensable condition," said she, "for I see that my fears are well founded." Covert now came in, and our sociability, much to my regret, was done with. From the conversation that ensued, for I was curious to know what brought her here, I found that these visits of the dancing girl had reference to some investment of her spare funds in stock. Covert, among his other employments, had got himself chosen officer in an insurance company, and Pepperidge Ferris and Smith were instrumental in advising Inez to make the investment. Perhaps I had no ground for suspicion, yet I determined to find out something of the particulars of the affair, for I didn't consider either Smith or Ferris immaculate. That was Chapter 7 of Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Autobiography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett.